What's going on, YouTube Metal Complex here, and today I'd like to do a video that I've been wanting to do for a really long time. It is a very controversial topic, and I understand that I kind of risk putting myself in a position where people think that guy definitely doesn't know what he's talking about just by talking about it. But that's okay. I want to give my opinions, and again, these are just my opinions. I understand a lot of you, may agree with me, and some of you may actually unsubscribe to me because I'm, maybe classifying a knife that you love and would classify as more hard use than I would. Just understand, again, these are just my opinions. I am not a professional knife user. I'm not a knife maker. This is all just based on my experience as a regular knife guy. I work in an office setting. I do outdoor projects a lot of times on the weekends, and I grew up working construction for my dad's construction company, so I'm familiar with tools and what to use certain tools for, what not to use certain tools for, how hard things can be used. Basically, I grew up learning, whether or not I should be using a specific tool for a specific task, and I'm going to do my best to apply that experience and knowledge to what I've learned about folding knives over the years. So, let's go ahead and move on here. What I've got in front of you here are three knives that I think everybody who's really familiar with the knife world, or you guys are going to be familiar with. On the far left, the Victorinox Cadet, a slip joint folding knife. In the middle, the Benchmade Griptilian, an axis lock folding knife. And on the far right, the Hinderer XM24, which is a very large titanium frame lock. Now, again, some of you will disagree with me, but these three knives I think represent the three categories of light, medium, and hard use. Now, I'm going to go into detail of what I think constitutes light, medium, and hard use a little at a time. There's going to be a ton of knives on the table today. I will probably make the thumbnail that way, just like knives everywhere. Yeah, there's going to be a whole bunch of knives. So again, don't get offended if I classify a knife that you really love in light, medium, or hard use. I'm not necessarily saying all knives that are hard use are the best and all knives that are light use are the worst. Because I generally carry knives between these two categories, as I think most people do. So anyways, let's go ahead and get into that. Obviously, the Victorinox Cadet is going to represent the light use category first. This is a slip joint style folding knife, so nothing locks. The blade is very thin. A lot of these will run on Foster Brown's washers. They'll also run on no washers whatsoever. This isn't a knife that you would really want to dig in and do any sort of prying, or I mean, not that you'd want to do prying with really any pocket knife, but you definitely wouldn't want to do it with this. You risk breaking the tip, you risk bending the knife or the liners. This is simple light aluminum steel liners or very thin steel liners. So this isn't a knife that you're really going to want to bear down on really hard heavy cuts. You're not going to want to like repeatedly cut open tires with a knife like this. This is designed to do little things. Open letters, open small packages, things like that. It's a fantastic everyday carry knife, one that would serve you very well in an office setting. So just, keep that in mind. That's kind of how I feel about that one there. Also, I would say pretty much any super inexpensive knife that you might find at Walmart. That's the Ozark Trail green knife. It's a liner lock, plastic liners, very thin blade. Serves well as a junk drawer knife, something you'd throw in your truck. Things, just basically a knife that you're going to do little tasks with. You're not going to take that thing out, stabbing it into wood and prying, chunks out. You're not going to do, heavy pressure cuts, anything like that. That's how I'd classify that knife. Now, obviously, and I think maybe I have this one out here just to show it again because I'm going to do a review on it. Your Great Eastern cutlery knives, these are really, really nice. They're very well made, but again, it's kind of the same thing. It's still in the same category as your Victorinox Cadet. So I don't need to go much more into detail there. Another more common modern style folding knife, that's the Lion Steel TRE Titanium. It's a small knife that runs on bearings. Yes, it is titanium. It's M390. Still has a fairly thin blade. It runs on bearings, and bearings are not ideal for hard use situations because they gunk and stuff can get trapped in there, which causes a problem on deployment and potentially even lockout. Now this is a frame lock, but like I said, the titanium's pretty thin. It's been milled out, which doesn't always create, for a disadvantageous situation. But this is, again, not a knife that I would take out, and use really, really hard on a construction site. The examples that I'm going to be using here for medium and hard use are based on, my experience on a construction site. There are situations where you will use a tool that is a little bit outside of its intended purpose range. For the most part, a hammer is a hammer, a pry bar is a pry bar, a screwdriver is a screwdriver. But any of you who have worked in similar settings know that there are situations where you're holding something up and you have to just grab a tool quickly and use it. Now, none of these knives are knives that, and I'm not going to go into detail, none of these knives are knives that I would use for anything else outside of simple cutting tasks. Another category of knife that I would place in light use are your Italian style or your dressy switchblades. That's I believe the brand is Inox Leverletto. And this is a Frank B. Swivel guard stiletto. These knives are not hard use, and I always feel like when I show stuff like that, I know there are people who love those, and they just maybe you carry them, but I mean the locking mechanisms on these dressy automatic knives, these are not knives you can go out and really use harder, nor should you. They serve their purpose well. I think they're more just fancy than anything. They're more of a conversation piece. If we really want to talk hard use automatics, your Microtex and your Protex, those are probably gonna be able to use harder. In fact, I have a great example. The Protec Rockeye automatic that I showed in this channel a long time ago. That is used to this day by a gentleman I sold it to in the service department at a dealership, and he beats the crap out of that thing, and it still works flawless. So I'll have to show it again on the channel sometime. Much more hard use oriented automatic. These knives are examples of knives that are not. I would also put knives, and I know this is going to be another one's controversial. The Spyderco Delica. This kind of blurs the line. You're starting to cross into medium use because it's a lockback. It's reinforced by the steel liners. It's a little bit larger, maybe a little bit thicker, about the same blade thickness as the Lion steel. It's a better locking system, and it runs on phosphor bronze washers. It probably could handle a little bit more, but still a knife that I would not reach for in a situation where I might use a knife for something that's not quite a knife task. It's still going to have limitations, but it blurs the line. Again, I hope I didn't throw anything in here that really offends anybody, but these are all great examples of what I would consider to be light use folding knives. Office carry knives, obviously you don't want to carry something like this in an office setting, but just more light use stuff. These make great package openers, letter openers, things like that. Go ahead and move this stuff off the table here to save time. I'm not going to close them. I might close that one. We'll move on here to the medium use category. Okay, moving on here to medium, and really what I'm going to call it to avoid any potential arguments is medium to hard use, because a lot of the knives that I'm going to show, people absolutely do use in their own hard use situations, and I have to start using these. I have to start saying that because hard use is different for every single person. Some people define it as just cutting, putting a lot of pressure into a cut, and some people define it as actually using a knife like a pry bar or doing the spine whack test. And then the lock not coming undone. We've got a lot of different definitions there, so we're moving into what I'm calling medium, but absolutely I'm going to show knives that can be used in hard use scenarios. Of course, we're going to start off with the Benchmade Griptilian. The Benchmade Griptilian has an excellent locking system. The axis lock, you can see there how that bar moves into place behind the tang of the blade, and then is sandwiched The blade itself is sandwiched there between the axis lock and the stop pin. It's also running on phosphor bronze, which is more ideal than bearings for hard use because it keeps gunk from getting trapped in there. So as far as the blade deploying and locking out properly, you have got a much more dependable lock. You've got a knife that has materials that are a little bit more substantial than knives from the previous category. You've got a blade that's ground in a way that's more ideal for some heavier cutting. You can see how the flat carries out there to about 80% the length of the blade. And even though the blade's not super thick, you can see there that it does keep that thickness out for, pretty well towards the tip. So the tip is a little more reinforced. If you find yourself in a situation where you're having to use the knife in kind of a non-knife situation, the Benchmade Griptilian is going to do a lot better than a knife like the Cadet in a scenario like that. So absolutely that knife can be considered anywhere from medium to hard use. But it does have limitations that will be exceeded by knives that I will show in the hard use category. That's something I want you guys to remember while I go through these knives. All of these knives can be used, for the most part, all these knives I'm going to show in this category can be used for hard use, but my opinion is that their limitations are exceeded by knives that I will show in the hard use category. So please do not be offended. Another knife that I'm going to place in this category is the Spyderco Paramilitary 2. Obviously, the compression lock is a ridiculously good locking system. Super tough. I've seen countless pictures of the PM2 online just clearly having the crap beat out of it. I've seen test videos. I mean, this knife can stand up to an enormous amount of abuse. Again, simple construction. You've got phosphor bronze. You've got a blade that's ground in a way that's ideal for slicing. You do have a tip that's not ideal for digging in. You're not going to want to push this into anything and do any of this really. I wouldn't do that with this knife. And I know I'm making some people mad, going, "Why would you even do that? Why would you even put yourself in that situation with a tool?" So anybody who's been in any situation where you have you've got a task and you've got tools to complete that task, and maybe let's say you're up on a ladder and you're holding something heavy up with your non-dominant hand, and in your right hand you suddenly find you're in a situation where you need a tool to either make a cut or stick into a position that allows you to free up your left hand. I have definitely been in that situation working on a construction site. The reason I'm being non-specific is so that you guys can visualize situations that may be similar, situations you've been in that may be similar to that. Oftentimes I've had to reach for a tool that and use it in a way that was not designed to be used for. So while, knives really should just be used for cutting, if that knife is on you and it's your only tool, you may use it in a way that it's not intended for. So that's kind of what I'm getting at there. Another knife I'd put in this category is the Manix 2. I have used and do still use that knife for outdoor projects. You can see it's a little more dirty than the PM2. Again, fantastic locking system, the ball bearing lock. It's got full steel liners. It does, again, have a blade that's pretty thin. So, its limitations are exceeded, again, by knives that I'll show in the hard use category. Obviously, the Spyderco Shaman. That one really blurs the line because you've got everything that's great about the PM2, plus you've got a blade that's thicker and it's got a really robust tip. That one I had a hard time deciding whether or not I wanted to put it in this category because it could easily fall absolutely in hard use. But again, it's a line blur, so don't crucify me. A knife that I think fits perfectly well into the medium category is any knife that's about this size and is running on bearings. You do have more substantial titanium. You've got more substantial blade thickness. Blade stability is good, though it's not reinforced by any additional bracing system like lug bracing or lugs bracing on the frame, and it's running on bearings. So do I think that a knife like the Steelcraft Series 3/4 Quaken could handle more abuse than the Victorinox Cadet? Yes, I do. Would I 100% depend on it in any situation where I had to use a folding knife? No, it definitely has its limitations. Absolutely. This is a perfect example of a medium use folding knife. Another good example, which might make some people mad. The Laconico Keen, the Mass Drop Keen. Again, it's a titanium frame lock. It's got more substantial materials in terms of thickness, which again is it's not a great, just because the materials are thick, the blade stock thickness and the titanium is thick does not necessarily mean that it's going to be more hard use. It's really the tolerances, and the locking mechanism and how well everything's going to stay in place when it's used in an extremely stressful situation. This knife, again, is running on bearings, so, could I depend on it, out on a construction site or in a more hard use scenario? Yeah, but it absolutely has its limitations. It's got just the stop pin and the frame lock, keeping the blade in place, and it's got bearings. But it's going to serve its purpose really, really well. Ontario Rat Model 1. A lot of people will go, whoa, 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 that's definitely a hard use knife. I love this knife. I do use it outside all the time, and I beat the crap out of it, and it's held up very well. Full steel liners. You've got phosphor bronze, a liner lock that holds up really well. Again, do I think it has its limitations? Yes, absolutely. All knives have their limitations, but some have more crazy limitations than others. So, again, this is a very foggy gray line category. Please do not be offended if I placed your favorite knife in medium when you think that it should be in heavy. Okay, moving on to the true, or what I would call true hard use. This is going to be, I've already got knives picked out, but all of these knives are going to have something extra from the knives that I showed in medium. It's not necessarily that they're bigger. It's that they have some additional reinforcement that is meant to, keep everything in place and keep the structural integrity of the knife intact while you're using it in situations that might tiptoe over that line of, should I be using a folding knife for this? The answer is, if you get to that point, probably not. You probably should be using a fixed blade if you're going to blur that line. But not everybody has in some situations, you just you got to use what's in your pocket. And again, I know people are going to go fixed blade or multi-tool. Why are we even having this conversation? There, I've acknowledged you. I've shown a multi-tool and I've shown a fixed blade. But really the video is about what's the difference between light, medium, and hard use. So anyways, let's go ahead and move into the next category. Okay, so the first knife I want to show in this category is going to be the Buck 110. And really the Buck 110 is representing any really well-made old school lockback folding knife. And the reason I want this knife in this category is because it's incredibly substantial. This is a time-tested locking system that's very simple but very reliable. You can see there how thick and how long that back lock is, that's also acting as a sort of a backspacer that adds to the structural integrity of the knife, which is already really, really good. You've got super heavy-duty steel liners. You've got these big, thick nickel bolsters laying on top of that, kind of acting like a plate of armor. And then you've got these nice, smooth micarta scales. Micarta is also very tough. You've got a not crazy, but pretty substantial blade stock thickness that carries all the way out to the tip and keeps that tip nice and thick and reinforced. This particular one is made out of S35VN. Tolerances are great, and you can see here how that locking system works. You move this back, and that plate slides into place behind the blade tang. That blade is absolutely not going anywhere until you disengage that back lock back there. It is absolutely solid. Excuse me, I had to stop the video there. Anyways, the blade cannot move until this lock back here is disengaged. Now, I know everybody wants to say, well, there's, situations where it could come undone if enough force is applied. I believe that the amount of force it would take to cause that lock back to disengage versus the amount of force it would take to get a knife like the Ontario Rat 1 to disengage is substantially different. I believe the amount of force that you can apply to the Buck 110 and the lockback is simply more than the Rat 1. So, and believe me, I'm showing this one on purpose because there are a ton of other knives in medium that you could argue points for. And I'm not here to make all day arguments. I'm just saying, To me, this is medium. To me, this is more substantial. Or I should say less substantial, more substantial. The Buck 110, I believe, is absolutely a more hard use oriented knife. I would have no reservations against grabbing the 110 to go out and work all day on a construction site. So move that one over here. Next one on the list, and this is kind of a, it's going to be a line blur for a lot of people. The Chris Reeve Large Inkosi. Now, a lot of you are going to say, well, there's no additional bracing or locking system on the Inkosi. The Inkosi, which means chief, and for those of you who don't know, Sebenza means work. I've had some people comment on my Inkosi video saying, that's a gentleman's folder. That's not a hard use knife. For those of you who don't know, Sebenza, which is the little brother of this, the large Sebenza 21, Sebenza actually means work. And Inkosi, which was this large Inkosi, was designed as a more substantial folding knife or larger brother to the Sebenza, means chief. It is absolutely designed as a hard use cutting tool. Everything about this knife is precision made. You have extremely substantially sized hardware. You've got a titanium frame lock made by the gentleman who invented the frame lock. You've got that ceramic ball bearing detent. The lockup is incredibly sound. You have massive phosphor bronze washers that add for additional or create for additional stability on the blade. Anybody who owns a Chris Reeve knife knows that for whatever reason, when they're locked out, they actually, even though there's no blade play, I must have cut myself at some point in this video. But there's no additional, there's no difference between the lack of blade play that I feel in the a knife like the Shaman and the Inkosi. Obviously neither of them wiggle, but for whatever reason the Inkosi just feels more solid. There's in my opinion, it would take a lot more to disengage the lock on the Inkosi than a lot of the knives in the medium category. It's kind of a line blur, but those, the way that this is made, just the lack of any unnecessary additional parts, the fact that the blade is about 0.145 thickness, maintains that thickness, all the way out. Just the tolerances in general, keeping everything just really, nicely in place, functioning smoothly. I would have no reservations, grabbing this knife and taking it out on a construction site. The titanium substantial. The titanium lock bar is substantial. It's just, even on the relief cut, you can see there it's pretty thick. This is a knife that I absolutely would trust in a more hard use scenario. I think that it's going to take more abuse than a lot of the knives that I showed in the previous category, just to reiterate that point. I know, I'm just recording the video right now. I haven't uploaded yet, but I can almost feel the arguments starting. Next up, one that I absolutely have to put in here, or two knives that I absolutely have to put in here, Hinderer knives, and specifically I think the 18 and the 24. Both of these knives, and now these two have bearings installed, but this new tri-way pivot system allows for bearings, nylon, and phosphor bronze. Let's go ahead and assume that I've installed phosphor bronze in these, because that's what I would install if I was really going to go out and beat on these things. These knives have the same level of attention to detail, in my opinion, as the Chris Reeve knives. Very thick materials, which again is not a 100% a reliable factor when we're defining hard use. But you can see there how thick that tip gets towards the edge. The Spyderco blade it almost looks like a pry bar. They do cut, of course. But that combined with the fact that you not only have the frame lock here, which you can see falls into place there, but these lugs also fall into these spots on the frame. So the bracing point is here, and these act as the stop pin, but they also act as bracing points for lateral force. So you've got a little bit more ability. Obviously, there's no wiggle, but I'll use the term wiggle room in terms of what you could actually use that knife for. The 24 is just a larger version of the 18. It's got an even thicker blade, 0.187 versus 0.165. Those lugs brace on the frame, and just, It's really just the same thing except larger. Do I think that they can handle more abuse? In fact, do I think that they can handle more abuse than almost anything on the table? Yeah, I honestly do. A little, I want to add something in about the spine whack test. So I'm still kind of don't like it, but I have to say, I just watched a video the other day where Rick Hinder himself was actually testing his new full track using the spine whack test to demonstrate how much it took to get the lock bar to disengage. It never actually disengaged. Now, I'm not a knife maker. I don't like the idea behind the spine whack test because, again, I don't know that I would put myself in a situation where I'm going to cause force to this side of the blade. But somebody like Rick Hinder, and yeah, people are going to go, "You're a fanboy. That's why you're all of a sudden okay with it." If somebody like Rick Hinder is going to use that method to test the lock on his knife, I guess I can't really argue with it. The guy is an actual knife maker. He makes my favorite knives that exist. And I believe that he knows what he's talking about. And he's speaking from experience. The guy was a firefighter, absolutely uses knives in what I would consider to be hard use scenarios. And he designed his knives around that idea. So there you go. I guess I can't really deny that it's the spine whack test is a reasonable method to test the strength of the lock bar, or basically what it would take to get it to disengage. Anyways, the XM 18 3.5 inch and 24, absolutely I would put in the hard use category. I think they're amongst the most capable folding knives on the planet because of their design. And one more that I'm going to place in this category, and it's going to speak for a lot of knives of this brand, the Cold Steel 8010. There is simply no denying that triad lock is one of the most substantial locking systems on the planet. And it very well may be the most substantial locking system on the planet. This particular knife might actually be the most hard-use oriented folding knife on the planet. But this might be like the last line before you go to a fixed blade. In fact, I mean, if you're arriving at this point where you're really going to push this knife to its limits, you might just want to go ahead with a fixed blade. But this thing has 3 points of contact. You've got this enormous back lock, contact with a stop pin on the blade tang, and then it actually hooks back under. If you can see underneath here, you can Google a picture. It hooks back under and contacts again, grabbing on to that back lock, and it makes it, I mean, it's just almost impossible to get that to move. You would have to create an inhuman amount of force to get that to disengage. At that point, you're not doing anything with that knife that's anywhere near reasonable if you're gonna do that. So on top of that, nice thick aluminum liners that work just fine. Nice contour G10 scales. Like I said, super thick back lock. A blade thickness that's going to be around the same as the Hinder XM18, I believe 0.165. And look at the tip. Same deal. Very thick tip. Plenty good for stuff that you might not want to be doing with a folding knife. So the 80-10 and triad locks pretty much around, all the way around are ones that I have to place in hard use. So again, just to reiterate, because I don't want to make anybody upset, a lot of the knives from the medium category could easily be placed in hard use. There's a lot of you guys are using knives like the Manix 2, the Griptilian, and the Paramilitary 2, and you're using them outside every single day, and you're using them in really stressful situations. They are going to stand up to the elements. They are going to stand up to heavy pressure cuts. They are going to stand up to some things that you wouldn't normally or shouldn't be using a folding knife for, and they are line blurers there. But each of the knives in front of you on this table, I 100% believe exceed the limitations of knives in that previous category. Now, of course, the big question is, do I need something like this? Does that make them better? Like, am I doing something that would require one of these knives over, say, the Griptilian, the Manix 2, and the Paramilitary 2? Probably not. Most people are not doing things every day with a knife that would, absolutely require one of these on the table. And, so that's a question that you have to ask for yourself. basically all of these things just they've got something that is it's additional reinforcement over knives from the previous category. I believe there are very few people on this planet who need an XM24, truthfully. For me, you know, like truthfully, the craziest things that I do with folding knives. Let me go ahead and move these off the table, and I'll tell you what I would use. My go-to for my hard use tasks that I reasonably do on the weekends, the Manix 2, and where the heck is that? There it is, the Rat. Both of these knives, just to hopefully dissuade some of you from getting upset with me. Both of these knives have handled everything that I have thrown at them. I've used them pretty darn hard, still as knives should be used for, but there have been situations where I've stuck each of these blades into places and kind of wiggled the handle around a little bit, which is not something you should do with a folding knife, but I have, and both of these are just fine. They stood up to that, and they do it. So, you know, for the most part, you know, when somebody asks me, hey, I need a knife that's really going to stand up to some abuse, these are the types of knives that I recommend to people. Not only because I think they're really well made, but because, you know, obviously the Rat 1, you know, falls into a reasonable price range, and the Manix 2 is just, I love that knife. It just works so well for a wide variety of stuff. Now, you know, let's say that the world is coming to an end, you know, an apocalypse scenario, you know, what kind of knife would I reach for? Then we get into a situation where, just to be safe, if it has to be a folding knife, then maybe we get into a situation where I'm reaching for something like one of these guys, you know, and that's a crazy thing to consider. But part of the reason I'm doing this video today is because I had this idea for a video, top 5 apocalypse knives, or top 5 knives I would reach for in an end of the world scenario. And so I wanted to kind of let you guys know how I defined hard use before I did a video like that. I think it would be fun, but I also I wanted to make sure everybody kind of got a good understanding of where I was coming from and why I thought what I thought. So expect to see that top 5 video this weekend. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. As always, this is really just meant for entertainment. You know, what I'm saying is not absolute fact. There are a million variables to consider when you're trying to define a knife that's hard use. There's a million variables, and I'm not aware of 99% of them. I can't be. I'm just a guy who sometimes uses his knives kind of hard on the weekends, you know, and a guy who once worked on a construction site. That's all I am. So I don't have nearly enough experience to say definitively which knives belong in which category. But I thought you guys might be, you know, mildly entertained by this, and I've always wanted to talk about it. So anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like. So please check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, then please subscribe to my channel, because there is definitely more coming. We'll go ahead and line some of these knives up just to give you one last look of everything, or a bunch of the stuff that I showed on the channel here before I sign off. But anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.